everyone. Thank you for your patience. Vote is over, so I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 119 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, of course known as the Mighty OGO. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3C and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, January 18, 2023, the committee resumes its study of federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey & Co. A reminder and a new reminder before we begin, remind all members and other participants in the room of the following important preventative measures to protect our interpreters. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful feedback, incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from the microphones at all times as indicated. And a note from the speaker to members, Monday, April 29th, following measures are in force. All earpieces have been replaced by model new one, which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color. The old ones are gray. If you have a gray one, please remove it immediately. Default, all unused earpieces are unplugged at the start of every meeting, so you'll need to plug in, please. When you're not using earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker to your right. Consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Room layout, you've noticed, has been changed to increase the distance between microphones, reduce the chance of feedback from ambient earpieces. These measures are in place so we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of our participants, mostly the interpreters. Thanks everyone for your cooperation. We will have a vote, I think, in about 45 minutes. If I can have UC, we'll continue the meeting up until 10 minutes before the vote starts. Wonderful. End of the meeting, the last 20 minutes or so, I need some time for committee business, go over budgets and some other issues that I need to update the committee on. We have some officials from PSPC back with us today. Ms. Reza, welcome back. I understand you'll have an opening statement for us. Please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. Joining me today are Dominique Laporte, Assistant Deputy Minister for Procurement, Molly Royce, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for Procurement, and Catherine Poulin, Assistant Deputy Minister for Departmental Oversight. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier le comité.
I want to start by thanking the committee for this opportunity to appear to discuss the procurement ombudsman report on contracts awarded to McKinsey. It's important to me as the Deputy Minister with a key responsibility for procurement to be given this opportunity to comment. I would also like to sincerely...
This device is not working for me, so I need someone on the technical side to bring me one. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just pause for a moment. Ms. Reza, if you can continue, and then we'll interrupt you if it's not working, but please go ahead.
En tant que sous-ministre dont l'une des...
As Deputy Minister with a key responsibility for procurement, it's important for me to be given the opportunity to comment. I would also like to sincerely thank the Procurement Ombudsman and his team for their review of the contracts awarded to McKinsey. We have carefully considered the entire report, not only the recommendations where PSPC is implicated directly, but all recommendations to consider how we can take a leadership role to further strengthen procurement practices.
In the midst of increasing public scrutiny and discourse related to procurement practices, the Prime Minister tasked the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister of Public Services and Procurement to undertake a review of contracts awarded to McKinsey and examine if contracting processes comply with Treasury Board policy and departmental internal control frameworks. Then, shortly thereafter, in February 2023, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement made a further request that the Procurement Ombud conduct a review of federal contracts awarded to McKinsey. Consistent with the result of the first review, the Procurement Ombud found no instances of political interference, no wrongdoing, and no fraud. I believe this is important to the committee and to the procurement workforce who take their stewardship and integrity responsibilities seriously. The Ombud's report looked at 32 contracts with McKinsey. PSPC was the contracting authority responsible for 23. As a result of his review, the Ombud made 3 recommendations directed to PSPC. The department accepts and welcomes the recommendations and is implementing an action plan to further strengthen procurement processes, specifically as it relates to better documentation, among others. For example, one area of this review relates to the verification of security clearances for resources. I would like to reassure this committee that all the McKinsey resources had the required security level to perform work and to access sensitive information and assets. That being said, the OPO report identifies documentation shortcomings. For example, noting that the security clearance records should also be consistently included in procurement files. As a result of the report, I've asked security and procurement officials to take a step back to reconsider the existing rationale as to why the security clearance and contract records need to be kept in 2 physical places, and if this is still relevant as we move to e-procurement. Turning to examine the procurement instruments that were used for contract award, PSPC took steps in 2021 to establish a national master standing offer as an efficient approach to procure proprietary McKinsey benchmarking services that were in demand from client departments. In total, PSPC issued 19 contracts under the standing offer, which is now expired. The Ombud's observations on the standing offer are actively informing the next iteration of instruments related to procuring benchmarking services. Indépendamment des constatations relatives à l'offre à commande.
Separate from the findings related to the standing offer, the Ombud concluded that, taken collectively, his observations led him to believe there were instances that the procurement processes created a strong perception of favoritism towards McKinsey. PSPC has no direct evidence of this. We have responded to the Procurement Ombud, noting some of the assumptions and interpretations differ from those made by PSPC. The Ombud acknowledged this by including references to our views in his report, which he referenced in his testimony to this committee earlier this week. In conclusion, I would like to specify with the committee that as the Deputy Minister and as senior officials responsible for the procurement function in PSPC, we take to heart the observations and recommendations made by the Ombud. We have a responsibility to better understand and address his findings, especially as they relate to ensuring better record keeping and transparency to advance both the process and controls related to procurement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mrs. Block for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you to our witnesses, I will be, I believe, asking questions of Ms. Reza, but if others have the answers, certainly feel free to pass those on. Earlier this year, reports from the Auditor General and the Procurement Ombudsman on the Arrive scam debacle raised serious concerns about contracting, particularly in the sole sourcing of several contracts. Today, you're here, appearing on the heels of yet another report from the Procurement Ombuds, which raises serious concerns in regard to contracting in relation to McKinsey. Of deep concern is the OPO's comments regarding the National Master Standing Offer, or NMSO, and that none of the call-ups had any justification for sole sourcing. Yet your department approved them all, shoveling out tens of millions of dollars to this company. Who signed off on these call-ups?
Thank you very much for the question, and I'll give some context around the call-ups. NMSO.
Mr. Chair, I did not ask for context. I asked who signed off on these call-ups. Who was responsible for signing off?
The call-ups were mostly signed off at the procurement officer level, some at the manager level. We can provide the the breakdown of the individual.
Yeah, I would like the names if you could provide that to the committee. I would appreciate that. When the NMSO for McKinsey's benchmarking services was established, who at PSPC signed off on that?
I believed it was signed off at the ADM level of procurement. So we'll confirm again the names as people move between jobs. It was in 2021, unless you know.
The question, the National Master Standing Offer was actually established as per our normal protocol for all National Master Standing Offers. A commodity lead is responsible for the approval. In the case of professional services, it was at the Executive 2 level. And that was the level that approved this National Master Standing Offer. And just to go back to the earlier question, there was a sole source justification in place for the National Master Standing Offer at the time, an integrity check, as well as price support to ensure that the price was fair and reasonable.
Right. I'm looking for names.
We're happy to provide the name, but I can tell you the level. It was an executive, a senior director in our procurement office, and it was in 2021, which was before I was there. And I believe the individual is no longer employed in the department, but happy to provide the name.
Thank you very much. The Procurement Ombudsman also found in his review of the McKinsey contracts that PSPC failed to provide a statement of work on the vast majority of call-ups against the standing offer. The Ombudsman said in his report that he could not determine to what extent McKinsey was allowed to define the contract requirements for these departments. This is exactly the type of thing that happened with GC Strategies in the Arrive Scam contracts. Your department allowing a private contractor to determine their own scope of work. Why is your department making it a regular practice to allow companies to determine the terms of government contracts that they will be awarded?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Just to confirm, when a National Master Standing Offer is established for a unique product, such as the benchmarking that McKinsey provided, the statement of work that was associated with the establishment of that tool has been traditionally the master statement of work that's been used to pull call-ups from underneath that. That was from 1995 to about 2021 for all national standing offers of this nature. In 2021, we took a step back and we decided to add increasing scrutiny and documentation around support. And by 2022, 2023, we had added further requirements around the statements of work. But the traditional historical piece was to use the statement of work associated with the establishment of the procurement tool, given that it was an individual, unique, proprietary service provided to Canada.
So I am simply going by what the Procurement Ombudsman reported on, and he questioned the fairness and the transparency of the lack of documentation that was available to determine whether or not McKinsey defined its own scope of work. So we'll leave that there. I believe that there are questions around that, around fairness and transparency. Those are the Procurement Ombudsman's words, not mine. He also found multiple cases of departments changing procurement strategies to allow for McKinsey's participation. He also found that departments avoided mandatory methods of supply to direct contracts to McKinsey. And then he found that departments failed to establish cost estimates before discussions with McKinsey. And he found that bids were inappropriately reevaluated, resulting in McKinsey being the only compliant bidder and being awarded the contract. All of this under the watchful eye of PSPC. I believe this is a colossal failure of your department's core purpose. What value does your department offer aside from the rubber stamping of corrupt procurement practices?
I'm afraid I have to interrupt because it is past our time. Perhaps get to it in the next round or provide in writing. I will remind everyone, I know you've been with us before, but our committee as well has passed a motion that all requests for information are to be returned to us within 3 weeks. Mr. Kuzmierczak, I believe you're up.
Yes, Chair. Mr. Reza, you had, in your response, you referred to the National Master Standing Offer. You talked about, referenced 1995 to 2021. I didn't quite understand sort of the point that you were making there. Can you just repeat that a little bit and take your time to clarify that?
Thank you very much. I was trying to build the context that within procurement, we use different methods of supply. And there's many of them, and they're competing, and some of them have been long-standing. Some started in 1995. A lot were established in 2005, the ones that we hear frequently around the information services, TBIPs and SBIPs, which look at solutions, came on longer. So what I was trying to make clear is that these have been, for the last 20 years, methods of supply that we look to modernize and build on and have existed in for the last 20 years in terms of how we deliver procurement. We're constantly looking at how to improve them, but these are not one-offs, or they were not created for any specific supplier. In the case of benchmarking, which is an area the government needs as part of their independent review and their quality assurance, we have 4 or 5 vendors that have had similar arrangements, and this has all been publicly and transparently posted on government websites for many years, so it's not something done that's unique and not well understood. But if you permit, I'm going to turn. Dominique, est-ce que tu as quelque chose à rajouter? We're good.
Can you explain to Canadians the value that benchmarking brings to the work of government? Because I want to start from first principles here. What's the value of benchmarking that companies like McKinsey and others provide?
Thank you very much for your question. And really, the client departments will be best placed to talk about the value that they bring. But at a high level, benchmarking is against global standards practices using proprietary data sets, gives the government a sense of where they are on their transformation projects, on citizen delivery. It looks at a global overview, and it's actually a requirement of Treasury Board policies to have that independent kind of review function, which can be achieved through benchmarking contracts, as we described, or through independent audit.
What does benchmarking, what value does it provide to the government? Is it a matter of efficiency to be able to more efficiently deliver government programs? Is it about effectiveness? Is it all of the above?
I would add that it is all of the above, in the sense that benchmarking gives you kind of a gold standard to aim for, understands whether or not Gates can proceed in big IT transformation projects. I know that PSPC, as a client department, actually competed some McKinsey tools, and they came and looked at our pay processing, and were able to benchmark with their training and introduce certain efficiencies that were pretty significant for the pay function of the government.
When I had a chance to question the procurement ombudsman here this week, I asked him flat out, did he find any instances of fraud? And he answered unequivocally, no. I asked the procurement ombudsman, is there any evidence in your review of corruption? And his answer was unequivocal, no. And I asked him, did he find in his analysis and investigation any examples of political interference? And his response, unequivocal, was no. What he did find is, as you had mentioned, a strong perception of favoritism. And he was referring to the practice of changing procurement strategies midstream. And so the ombudsman criticized departments for changing requirements between whether they required a task-based contract.
Sorry, sir, let me interrupt. Pull your mic down a tiny bit, please.
Contract, pull it down. Oh, does that work? Is this better? Is this okay? Is this better? Okay. So I wanted to ask, to start, if you can explain the differences between these two types of contracts. but then also just speak to that criticism of the perception of favoritism that the ombudsman had found. If you can help us understand both of those things.
Let me start, and then I'll turn to my colleague to add some remarks. I read that with grave concern, and it's in the report, and certainly we wanted to work with the Ombudsman to unpack it. When you think of procurement strategies that change, sometimes a client comes and they don't know the procurement world. They don't know what is the actual right method of supply, what is the best. And at the same time, we're trying to change how we do procurement. We want to move away from task-based procurement, where you're asking someone to produce 1, 2, 3, versus to a solution-based procurement, where they're providing the government with a turnkey solution. This is our opportunity, this is our problem. So there's always lots of different moving pieces, and each individual procurement has a procurement plan. And that procurement plan gets locked in when they go into the solicitation. Until then, things are moving back and forth and are fluid. It's being shaped to provide the best output for Canadians. I'm going to stop here and see Dominique.
And
I'm
just going to
sorry,
add
I'm
also.
glad you're stopping there because that is right at our 6 minutes. But we'll get a chance to come back. Mrs. Vignola, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll allow my colleagues to put on their earpieces. Thank you, Madam Reza, Madam Roy, Mr. Laporte, and Madam Poulin. Thank you for being here with us. In response to the report, PSPC declared in paragraph 118 that it had legitimate reasons to adopt the approach it adopted when it awarded the non-competitive NMSO and used the same approach for the other call-ups, non-competitive orders as well. In your introduction, you said you have received well the recommendations made by the Ombudsman. You have taken note of them, but they are not really appropriate. That's what I understand. What are those reasons? Why was McKinsey able to have a non-competitive NMSO? Well, we have data, we've heard all of that, but from what we've heard, it would appear that we have people here in Canada who can collect data already paid for by taxpayers and a pan-Canadian institution. Why McKinsey in particular?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I'll try to answer. After that, I'll give my colleagues the opportunity to answer. The first part is it's important to note that McKinsey was one of the 5 suppliers, so there was transparency at our end. This was not something that was done only for McKinsey. It was a decision that was made that had to do with the that for benchmarking we needed access. There were rules that allowed that if there was sole sourcing, we could come up with a procurement method
To the suppliers and to the clients to move expeditiously. If you know that there's only one that can compete, we go there. Mais au deuxième volet, Dominique.
Merci. Souvent, quand on regarde quelque chose,
Thank you. Sometimes, in hindsight, it's easy to see whether things were white or black. But sometimes it's not obvious because this was data that was only available to McKinsey. As Ms. Reza has said, we established agreements with 4 other suppliers. So this was transparent, known to everyone. I don't think that our procurement officers got up one morning with the intention to favor one company above others. So there was transparency. Thank you. Now, the justifications that were missing in the file, where are they? Answer. The justifications were really were established and were always in the procurement tool. It's because the procurement ombudsman asked for a single justification whenever clients wanted to use that. So that's why we started thinking of coming up with that method. But before that, it was the standard to use the justification that had been prepared when the tool was created.
Of individual justification.
Pourquoi?
Why don't we justify each of these steps in a contract out of transparency to make sure that there's no appearance of collusion or favoritism? Why, from the onset, don't we include those justifications? Why don't we do that?
Je dirais que c'est un point qui...
Answer. That was noted by the ombudsperson, and we can do better. We can improve best practices when it comes to documents. So, in my capacity as Assistant Deputy Minister, I take this seriously. There's a new position for quality assurance, and that person will make sure that those stages are respected. Each critical stage for procurement is documented. We are creating tools and procedures that will help us respond to that concern. If I may add, we will decide on the key data and the key steps. We award 400,000 contracts every year in the government of Canada, the value of $38 million. So it will be nice to have everything in the system for transparency reasons, but we need to work together with OGO and the Auditor General to find out what are the key documents.
Dans votre...
Thank you. During your remarks, you talked about an action plan. Is it possible to submit that action plan to this committee very quickly? With pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vignola. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. This is obviously a complex matter. At the same time, when you read through the Ombudsman's report, it's pretty scathing about the procurement process. And you've accepted the findings of the Ombudsman. What I'd like to get at is why those shortcomings exist. So the lack of documentation, for instance, why is that occurring? Is it sloppiness? Is it because there's a lack of respect for the stated requirements that are laid out in the procurement process? Is there something more nefarious going on? What's the reason for the shortcoming?
I think we're all going to be fighting for response time, but I'll tell you that there is no one single reason, and we'll unpack it in many ways. One of the things that we saw in the report was there are no CIO conflict of interest declarations on some of the reports. And I said, why not? And we went back to the supply manual, which provides a direction to procurement officers and to clients. It doesn't have to be on file if you're a public servant, because your code of conduct manages it. So what is defined as a lack of documentation in the report, that's accurate, but we haven't established a baseline of requiring it in the first place. Same with the security requirements. You know, I saw that the security requirements weren't there. Well, they were there, but they weren't in the 2 or 3 places they were supposed to be in. So we need to rationalize the lack of documentation. We need to be clear on what's causing it. We need to capture.
I'm not quite sure I understand the nuance behind that point. They were there, but they weren't where they were supposed to be. Doesn't that mean they weren't there?
If I may add to that, over time, there was a different way to store information on the record. It could have been by email. It could have been stored on some local drive. So I have to say that it's not because something was not there, and I do appreciate that we don't have the evidence to show that it was there. But this is where we need to leverage electronic procurement solution that will make sure that we document every step and that we maintain a central repository of all information. Because going back in time, Madame Mirza was mentioning the numbers of procurement that we handle on a yearly basis. So we need to improve on the tool, and this is exactly what we've been doing over the last 5 years.
Just to add that point, if I could, in terms of the use of these methods of supply, and the reason that we do use them is due to the flexibility that they provide to the system and for us to be able to leverage them. And I would just wanted to add that as of 2023, we did require sole source justifications, statements of work that were clearly defined requirements for all of the benchmarking national master standing offers until they expired. And going forward in the future, we'll be procuring this type of capacity through a competitive process.
So the National Master Standing Offer that we're talking about for McKinsey pre-existed that commitment in 2023 to start documenting everything more thoroughly?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it was consistent with the approach that we were taking in the business line at the time, but we have adjusted that in light of the observations that have been made, and we noted the requirement to have additional documentation.
So in your response to the Ombudsman's report, you pushed back on some of the assumptions and characterizations of the lack of rationale for the National Master Standing Offer decision. You say that, quote, rationale for making the decision cannot be assumed in the report without evidence. My read is that the Ombudsman didn't take issue with the rationale. He was taking issue with the lack of evidence. So the question is, where's the evidence? And why did you push back on that finding, which is that the evidence wasn't provided? It seems like you're making an argument that you're pushing back on something the Ombudsman didn't actually say, which is that the rationale were incorrect. What the Ombudsman was saying was there was no rationale, and so he doesn't understand, like it's not transparent why that particular procurement process was chosen.
Thank you very much. Just quickly going back, lack of documentation haunts us, and we're fixing it. Like, I don't actually enjoy coming to committee to talk about lack of documentation, any inferences it puts, so that's got to be shut down. With respect to our response to the procurement ombudsman, we've accepted the findings, we've accepted the recommendation. On the issue of rationalization, it is because from our assessment, when we set up the National Master Standing Office, we did all the price verification, the rationale, the evidence. So adding on that each call-up had to have this individual justification was not in our kind of line of sight for the last 20 years. It is now.
In terms of getting back to my original question about the reason for the shortcomings, is it because it was not understood what the requirements were, or they weren't clearly enough laid out? Like, I'm a layperson when it comes to this stuff, but when I read the Ombudsman's report, he's like, there are clearly laid out requirements for documentation, and those requirements were not met. So either they were not met because they were missed, or because they weren't understood, or because they were, the people filling out the documentation didn't want to. Like, I'm just trying to understand why they weren't there.
Thank you very much. I don't think that there was an articulation or a requirement for the rationalization and justification for individual call-ups. That was required.
It wasn't articulated clearly enough to the people in charge of the procurement process.
It wasn't required as part of the procurement process. There's a distinction.
It wasn't required. Okay, interesting.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Kusi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. A previous PSPC minister personally signed a $5.7 million contract, even though your department agreed that ESDC had not met the threshold for a sole source contract with McKinsey. Why did this minister personally sign this contract when your department had already challenged this contract?
Thank you very much for the question. By way of quick context setting, Treasury Board policy on management and procurement sets out the financial delegation of each of authority specifically related to each department, each minister. So for us, it's $5.7 million. Then each department actually sets up a delegation tool that's posted that tells you what level. You've often asked us from a authority to enter in a contract, what's your level, who signed it. So for the minister, anything over $4.5 million, this type of contract needed to go to the minister. To do that, we, Molly and I have a role in this, took on additional requirements to ask the client to justify the contract. The initial set of justification was based on the 7 questions that are a Treasury Board template. The procurement officer went back, received additional information, was satisfied with the justification provided by ESDC, papered the file, provided a recommendation to Molly, and that turned into a recommendation for the minister to use her authority to enter into the contract. So there's pretty significant paper trail. I saw, as you did in the report, the commentary, but there was additional information provided as well as a robust rationale.
Could you please table this paperwork with the committee? Thank you. Have you received any direction from any procurement minister, before or after this contract on a procurement strategy with McKinsey?
No.
Has there been any indication of the minister of any other departments and agencies directing officials to specifically contract with McKinsey?
No.
I'm going to go back to the missing documents. So it seems to be a trend that documents will go missing in numerous procurement procedures that we review here at OGO. And as I mentioned that in the previous meeting, this has been a trend in numerous reports of numerous parliamentary officers. The procurement ombudsman said on Monday that this is a long-standing issue that we've seen in many, many of our procurement practice reviews. The one distinction that I would note specific to McKinsey is the timing of these documentation lapses. Traditionally, we saw a lack of documentation across the board, but here we see it sometimes at discrete times within a process where we would have documentation present for certain steps of the process, and then at seminal moments there would be a lack of documentation. That's the part that's concerning. So why do you think these departments are choosing not to document at times that seem inconvenient for them to document?
Thank you very much for the question. I would note that when you look at the universe of contracts that were reviewed in this review, there was 32. 19 of them are part of the National Master Standing Offer, so it's a very different set of documentation requirements that we've been discussing. The remaining ones were, for the vast majority, low contract value under, not all of them, but under 40,000. And I think that as the paperwork went back and forth, there was probably not enough hygiene and rigor around making sure it was well collated. Another issue when it comes to documentation and some of the frustration perhaps the committee notes, or I feel from the committee, is that when you do an evaluation of a bid, half of the bid documentation goes to the department that does the technical evaluation. And there's a whole bunch of bid methodology and material prepared there. And PSPC keeps the financial envelopes. They're kind of independent keys. And then we have to put the file back together and make sure documentation is well described. I don't know if you have any.
Thank you so much. I'll leave it there. If he's concerned, I'm concerned. In a $2.9 million competitive contract for ISCD, 2 bids were received, and McKinsey was not chosen because it did not have the best price and financial score in comparison to their technical capabilities. After this review, ISCD asked to reevaluate and choose McKinsey instead, despite the completion of this evaluation. In response, ISCD stated they would be happy to delete the financial evaluation email to hide the fact that they were requesting a change. McKinsey shockingly then received this contract. Do you condone the deletion of emails in order to favor certain companies in the procurement process?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Chair. Absolutely not, and PSPC was not involved in the procurement. Further, I picked up the phone and spoken to the ISED deputy, and he assures me that training is in place, and it was really inexperience and error, and it was noted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baines, before you start, bells are ringing. As everyone's aware, we have 27 minutes. We'll all vote electronically, so I'll cut off at, are you going to vote in person?
In the House.
Okay,
Should White House.
so we'll suspend with 10 minutes to go. Is that fine for you? Wonderful. Mr. Baines, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our department officials for joining us again today. Elected officials come and go, so I think I've heard from you that this procurement process has gone back since 1995. Today, I heard, and we've heard from other witnesses in this committee about it going back to 2003, and the procurement process has not changed. My concern is that government officials have often been around for decades, and they've built relationships around with people, and there's subcontractors, contractors, and again, I know that the concern's been raised by some of our friends from across the way as well about the potential of collusion and getting favoritism. So, what? And I think you mentioned training that's being done on the standards for procurement, some changes that are being made. What is PSPC doing to address the recurring issue of documentation missing from the files? Is there, I think we even heard from the minister that there's a new AI process that might be being implemented. Is that something that you can give us some knowledge around?
Thank you very much for the question. And it goes back a little bit to the earlier question. What is the implementation plan for this and other audits and what we heard in ArriveCan to avoid the documentation challenges we face? It goes back to training. It goes back, I know we've put a new quality assurance officer in place to be able to review the material. We have been talking about e-procurement. We have been identifying what actually is part of a procurement strategy in terms of documentation. And we've been looking at our own processes and looking to see how we can actually amp it up so that we have more clarity and transparency around, including using the Treasury Board open portal and the training associated with it. But if you permit, I'll pause here.
So thank you. DM Riza did touch on most of the elements, but also one of the things that we did this week is to send, first of all, we had town hall with all our staff. So we did make sure, because the last thing I want is for the procurement ombudsman to draw negative inference for the lack of information on record. I think this is very unfortunate, and it casts basically some doubt as to the motivation of our employees, and they don't want that. I think there's a clear desire to change. We've put something also as part of the PMAs, which are basically the management agreement of all the PG, including myself, the DGs, the director, to really make sure that this is a top priority, and employees are going to be measured, including me, against that. So from now on, we're going to be insisting, we're going to be making sure that, we've learned also from ArriveCan with some checklists that are there that were not there before. And coupled with that, we've got also the electronic procurement solution, which 98% of our procurement are now covered by that for PSPC. So a lot of action is being taken on that front, and I have to say that this is one of my key missions. And a year from now, the last thing we want is to be there and explain to this committee that there are some shortfall in the documentation.
On the electronic procurement process, it's an AI process. What measures are being taken so everybody understands the standards and procedures that are needed to train and on how that works?
In terms of the EPS, so basically it's a cloud-based solution. So the goal is to have all the key elements. So when the bid, for example, is published, so bidders are going to be able to bid on this platform. They are able to bid using that platform. So all the key documents, all the interaction with contracting authorities are no longer done by email. So in the past, for example, you used to send an email to the contracting authority. So this email maybe would get lost. So what's happening now is that we've got a central repository of all the key information, all the interaction. And what I'm very hopeful is that in future, we're going to be able to leverage that platform. So all the mandatory requirements are going to be there for bidders. The financial evaluation is going to be there. So there is still some investment, training that needs to be placed. But I have to say that in terms of keeping the information, we've got basically close to $9 billion of procurement that are now under the platform and 8,700 contracts.
Do you have data on how much of the human element is taken out of that and human error?
I don't have that information.
I think we should be clear, it's not AI, it's a cloud-based system. But I want to say we've been speaking a lot about documentation, record keeping, and the importance of it, but you used a word earlier that I recoiled at, and that is collusion. And here at PSPC and across the government of Canada, we look very carefully at our integrity and our stewardship, and we have a lot of things in place around collusion. And if you have a moment, Catherine...
I'm afraid we don't have a moment. We're running out of time. Thanks. We'll just finish up. I'm combining the next two rounds for the NDP and the block, so we'll do a 5-minute, and then you won't have anything next round. Go ahead, Mrs. Vignola.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Reza, when it comes to the recommendations made by the procurement ombudsman about security requirements, PSPC has indicated in the annex that they have come up with a new verification checklist for verifying professional services in February, and that a press release was sent to procurement staff in December 2023 to remind them of the requirements and the policy on security. First question, did those measures really help ensure respect for the security requirements? That was the first. Secondly, if the answer is yes or even no, it doesn't matter. How can we demonstrate its efficiency or inefficiency? How do we implement a plan of action with goals that we will make sure that those steps are well respected? Answer. I will start and then I'll give the floor to my colleagues. Now, what is interesting is that the issue is very complicated. We have 800,000 security codes for consultants that belong to us, and every year we have to review 100,000 security codes, and after that we have to make sure that the procurement forms are well integrated. So there are lots of elements that need improvement. So now let me give the floor to Madam Poulin. Thank you very much for the question. We must distinguish documentation for staff security codes and that of the organization. So there are two issues that have been noted in the report. One, security codes for individuals was not documented. The contract security program has an entire system that can verify whether people do have the right security code. So it's possible to call, you can send an email. What is missing in the procurement file is evidence that those verifications were done. Second security issue has to do with contract security. It's important to review the contract. I'm sorry for interrupting. My question was not well understood, I believe. I don't believe my question was well understood. As PSPC in Annex 1 says, it came up with a new verification list. It sent a communique to members of staff, and it reminded them of the security requirements. That is what you did. This is my question. How are you making sure that the security policy is being properly implemented, looking at all aspects? I'm not talking about what the ombudsperson said. Now, what are you doing to make sure that staff are doing exactly what they are required to do? Answer. Thank you very much for the question. The issue doesn't have to do with security, but documentation. My colleague talked about it a while ago. We want to make sure that there's a checklist in the procurement files so that they should be traced to show that verification was done when it comes to the security of the contracts. He explained measures that will be implemented, the information given to staff, verifications that have to be done in the file to make sure that the checklists are present in the file and to ensure that there's evidence that the call, email, or confirmation was done for all of the security files. Question. And will a report follow those verifications, or ultimately, if it turns out that the committee would be the ones to look at the situation, is there a system in place to make sure that the staff who doesn't implement the procedure is informed or retrained? I'll allow my colleague to answer. My colleague from procurement. Thank you. we are introducing measures. I believe that staff do have a desire to show that they've done their work. We are working very well together. Our directors will be following up. We are going to be ensuring quality control. Directors will be explaining to their staff why we are doing what we're doing. And these are reminders. We also have, they will also be looking through their files to see what their shortcomings. Yes, these things will be brought to my attention and to Molly's attention. Reports will be presented every 2 months to make sure that we take the necessary measures, including training. Thank you.
Go to Mr. Bachrach, and then since he's done, we will suspend. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to this issue of changing the procurement strategy midstream, and this is under line of inquiry 1, competitive procurement practices leading to contracts awarded to McKinsey. And the Ombudsman lays out a storyline that I think for most people seems inappropriate, where, and this is with regard to a contract for $452,000 procured by ICID, and they had originally considered issuing a contract directly using a non-competitive process, and then a review board internally said, no, that's not appropriate, which that's good. So checks and balances worked. Then they reached out proactively to McKinsey and provided them with a link to the task-based supply arrangement. And in response, McKinsey said, no, we don't qualify for that. And so I came back to them again and said, hey, good news. We've changed it. Now it's a solution-based supply arrangement. So, getting back to what we saw with ArriveCan, there's this situation where the vendors and the people in charge of procurement are in consultation. They're in communication about the shape of the actual procurement process. How is this? How is the public to understand this as anything other than completely inappropriate?
Thank you very much for the question. And from the outset, I'm going to say that PSPC was not involved in some procurement, so I'm just going to give some broad line observations. The methods of supply for the space of professional services are extremely complex. So on the face of it, the issue about which method of supply to use and pairing it, or this view that there's favoritism, it may only be that the methods of supply themselves did not lend themselves to the right bidder. So it's not always an issue of trying to say, you need to go through this method of supply versus another. So I think that's a key piece of information that needs to be understood, because most of our clients don't understand which method of supply is actually the suitable method of supply. So that's the first thing I want to draw to your attention. The second thing I want to draw is that in this particular case, they competed. I believe they competed the solicitation. But again, we need ICID at the table. I don't know if you were.
Just going to add also, to change from a task-based to a solution-based, this is something that is also encouraged under the directive on procurement. So we want to de-risk procurement. So I'm not sure, I cannot talk about the motivation in that case, but we want basically suppliers to take on more risk and less to client departments. So in itself, it's not necessarily a bad outcome. So not having been involved and not talking on behalf of ICID there, I have to say that this is now something that we're asking managers to do. Go to solution-based and stay away from task-based. So give that risk to the supplier instead of taking on. So, the reason why it was done, I would say that the outcomes appears to me positive. So
I accept that. So solutions-based is better. But in this case, it's the chain of events. It's offering them this meal, and then they say, no, I can't do gluten. And then they say, oh, well, we've got this other meal for you. How about this? It's that communication back and forth that makes it look to the public like things are getting cooked for a specific supplier. And if I go back to the Ombudsman's report, he says very clearly, collectively, these observations create a strong perception of favoritism towards McKinsey. One of the observations is that changing procurement strategies to allow for McKinsey's participation is one of the observations that led to that conclusion. Is that a conclusion that PSPC, I don't have your response in front of me right now, but is that one of the conclusions that you accepted in your response to the report?
That was one of the ones that we did not accept. So paragraph 110, where there's this collective overview, we have kind of views. First off, PSPC doesn't figure prominently in this area. We have one contract of under 25,000 where we have comments. Changing procurement strategies is okay. I go back to your initial question, Mr. Chair, about what would Canadians say. I think there's a balance as well as making sure we're optimizing the procurement system in a way that's efficient, fair, open, and transparent to make sure that we're putting the right tool in place to be able to execute and deliver on services. There's a balance. I'm not suggesting one way or the other, but it's okay to change procurement strategies. We often challenge when clients come to us and say, this is going to be sole source. We say no. And then we say, no, you have to compete it to say, are you sure you're not anybody else that can do it, that an A can? So it's okay to change.
But you must accept the perception. Like there's a when there's communication back and forth with the vendor that seems to lead to a change in procurement practice, it creates a strong perception that things are being adjusted to meet the needs of a particular vendor. Like this is the finding here. It's exactly what we saw with ArriveCan, and it seems like, in talking to the procurement ombudsman, he says this is a systemic problem throughout government procurement.
So I'll quickly add,
I'm afraid that is our time, and we are going to suspend to allow members to vote, and we will be back probably about 15, 20 minutes. Thank you very much. We have 4 more interventions, and then I need about 5 or 10 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Brock, for 5 minutes.
Ms. Reza, over a year ago, in fact, February 22nd, 2023, this committee received a letter from your Assistant DM, Policy Planning and Communications, Mr. Irecci, concluding a first tranche of documents that had been ordered by this committee. In that letter, your department promised that there would be more documents to come and promised that a second tranche would arrive well over a year ago, March the 3rd, 2023. Who directed your department not to provide these documents to the committee within that time frame?
Thank you very much for the question. I believe that the work is still underway. There's about 20 to 40,000 pages that need to be translated and collated, and the minimum redactions being done. I do believe they're on their way to you.
And you didn't see fit to update this committee?
I apologize. I should have started with that.
Okay. Can we have another tranche of documents delivered to this committee within 3 weeks?
I will do my utmost to do that, yes.
Okay. You referred 3 IT companies to the RCMP regarding fraudulent contracting, value of close to $5 million with a time frame of 2018 to 2022. Who are they?
Thank you very much for the question. Just for precision, they're actual resources. So they're the consultants or the IT specialists that...
Yeah, but who are they?
I'm going to have to turn to Madame Poulin, who has the oversight.
Madame Poulin? Identity, please.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. As the Deputy Minister said, these are individuals. They were the ones who were referred to the RCMP to maintain the integrity of the RCMP. We cannot provide the names of those resources. Thank you.
Is subject to an RCMP investigation, and an argument could have been made that we are preserving their integrity. There's still a presumption of innocence. People get identified every single day in this country when they're charged with a criminal offense. I'll ask you again, will you identify those 3 IT companies that have been referred to the RCMP?
Consult internally, and we'll see what we can do in order to provide those names.
Can you provide some context as to the size of those companies? We know at this point, GC Strategies, a small 2-person company, fleecing Canadian taxpayers for close to $60 million, all the way now to McKinsey, the largest strategy consulting firm in the world with 30,000 consultants across 65 countries. Again, potentially under RCMP investigation. So what are the sizes of the companies under investigation now?
Si vous permettez, je vais commencer. Let me just start, just for clarity. These are individuals. So how this came to light is that there would be maybe an individual working for 2 different companies and charging the Crown for the same time. So it's not really about the companies at this time, it's about the individual consultants working. So those names have been referred to the RCMP for criminal proceedings. And I'm going to stop here and swivel for a moment.
Okay. About a month ago, we heard from your minister, Duclos, and Minister Anand, that this was only the first tranche of potential fraudulent activity against the Canadian taxpayer. How many waves, how many tranches can the Canadian public expect to hear about?
Thank you for the question. Let me start. First off, this is a new data analytical capacity.
I'm not concerned about that, Ms. Reza. Ms. Reza, the question is very specific. How many other tranches, how many other waves of further criminal investigations can we expect? We got the impression from your minister and Minister Anand that there was going to be a review of all the contractors who have been potentially subject to investigations by the RCMP, investigations by the Auditor General. We know that there's 635 similar IT middlemen operating in the same capacity as GC Strategies. Are all of those 635 IT middlemen being investigated for potential fraudulent activities?
Thank you for the question. The investigations are targeting individuals who are awarded several contracts different firms. At the end of March, we also announced that we are stepping up data analysis. It is likely that we may obtain other results concerning individuals, consultants that are recruited by prime contractors and can bill the federal government for work on many or multiple contracts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shawari,
Point of order,
please.
Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Generous?
Yeah, Chair, during Mr. Brock's round of questions, he put a very direct question to the witness regarding the names of companies. The witness indicated that she didn't want to provide an answer. That's lovely, but we are a parliamentary committee, and we have a history of using the tools that the House provides us with to insist on answers. So I would, in respect of those rules, like you to put the question to the witness, Chair, with the witness understanding that we expect an answer on the question in order to not be in contempt of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Generous. And it's a good point. Colleagues, this is the exact same issue we had with Mr. Firth, where very clear direct answers or questions were put, and he refused to answer. And I'm not saying we're going down the same path as Mr. Firth, but a very clear question was provided, and I think the committee deserves a very clear answer. If you are going to provide it to us in writing, the name of the resources, that will be acceptable to us, I think, the committee.
Je répète ma réponse. Je vais consulter.
Let me repeat, I carried out internal consultations and we did everything we could while respecting legal requirements and privacy requirements to provide names to the committee. It's not that we don't want to answer.
There, I'm sorry, but we've been through this repeatedly. We've had the law clerk with us. Sorry, Mr. Generous, I have the floor. We've been through this repeatedly with various departments, yourself included. This committee and Parliament supersedes privacy law. It was a very clear question. We would just like, again, I think it was 3 resources you mentioned, 3 companies. I think after everything we've seen with GC and this report, I think it's fair to ask that you do provide it to us so we can avoid perhaps the issue Mr. Generous was referring to. Can you do that for us, Ms. Reza?
I certainly can. And I just want to add a footnote to this. I believe that there's a production order, and this is probably part of the hesitancy, so we will come back with the names, understanding that.
Okay.
Sorry, point of order.
No, let me.
Okay.
I think the question is pretty clear, and my request is that this is provided. I don't think we wish it would be part of the production order. If you could provide it separately, as has been requested by Mr. Brock, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
So I apologize. I'm saying that those names are under a production order right now for the RCMP, but we're going to come back to you. I wasn't proposing anything else. Thank you.
When can we get that information then, please?
Well, we'll try over the next few days to see exactly what the assessment is and provide it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Generous. Mr. Brock has the floor.
Again, I don't believe the Deputy Minister truly appreciates the role of parliamentary committees. As the Chair has indicated, privacy is trumped by this committee. The fact that you received a production order by the RCMP for the identity of those 3 sources does not in any way allow you to prevent this committee from receiving those names. There is no legal impediment for you to deliver those names to this committee. The issue of privacy is not relevant. And as I've indicated already, every single person...
Mr. Brock, I'm just going to interrupt you there.
Yes.
I think I've been clear. We'll say by Friday, please provide this information as been requested by Mr. Brock and provide it in writing to our clerk.
Point of order, Chair. Are the witnesses committing to provide that information or to come back with some further thoughts on whether or not?
They will provide the information that Mr. Brock has requested by this Friday.
The committee agrees to that, to require that. Okay, good.
Wonderful. Apologize. We are with Mr. Jouari, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome back, Madam President, your team. I'm going to ask a number of rapid questions, trying to make a point that I think Canadians deserve to understand. So, from a best practices in the industry, when it comes to procurement, what is the trend? Have you seen a trend that a lot of organizations are moving away from the task base into a solution based and outcome based? Yes or no?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that the government of Canada, as well as private industry, are always looking for agility in procurement, and moving from task-based to solutions is a key piece of that. And it's also going to be supported in terms of what we do with our own HR policies and staff augmentation that are public servants, as well as project management. Moving to more holistic solutions is where we'd like to go in this space.
That the solution base allows the organization to flourish and also be able to work better together to come up with an ultimate outcome that the task-based solution will not allow.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that there are niche uses for both. From a client perspective, having a solution is probably a very helpful approach in terms of digital delivery.
Thank you, and I'm glad you talked about the niche approach. So when an organization, the Government of Canada, is going through a large business transformation under many aspects, whether it's the process, whether it's the people, whether it's the technology, whether it's the back end, when you're going through a huge transformation at that scale, benchmarking is one of those activities that really will benefit from a solution-based approach rather than a task-based approach. And if traditionally we have done a task-based approach, as you are trying to understand the requirement and you decide that a solution-based approach is a better fit for that transformation, it's logical to change. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think those decisions are made in consultation with the client and the business requirement, and that procurement strategy evolves and looks at those different elements.
So I will take that as a yes. Okay, now let's go talk about the National Master Standing Offer, or NMSO. For Canadians, for simple Canadians like me, okay, what would be an equivalent of a National Master Standing Order? If I use the terminology of a standard purchase order, would that make sense?
I think trying to explain the policy instrument, I think you have to think of it as a catalog of a very specific store.
Okay.
That sells benchmarking and data properly.
Perfect. But that does not in any way means that there was no process before the issuance of a National Master Standing Offer for looking at the vendor, evaluating the vendor, making sure that they are qualified, and then issuing up to 5 National Master Standing Order or Master Purchase Order for example, benchmarking, which could cover a gamut of activities such as people transformation, such as technology transformation, such as process transformation, such as documentation transformation. All of those are various type of services that we do and the department goes to, and they need to do benchmarking against all of those to be able to go to the transformation. Is that a fair statement to make?
That is a fair statement to make, and if you permit me to add, I would also note that one of the key elements of establishing those National Master Standing Offers is that we did it in a very transparent way. It may have been unique to the various vendors in question. McKinsey is today's topic, but we actually had it out. It was posted, it was published, and they're aware. I draw to your attention even in recompeting based on some of the guidance that was received and observations of the Procurement Ombudsman. We sent it out recently, I think in June 2023, to 5,000 suppliers. Only 13 have come back to us because it's such a niche space, but we've opened it to make that playing field transparent for procurement purposes.
Thank you. So I would say going to a solution-based contract from a task-based contract, when you're in that specific niche activity, this is something that's quite logical. So there is no conspiracy in there. That's just right way of doing business. And having a master standing offer, actually 5 of those among 5 competing top benchmarking organization, there is no hidden agenda in there, aside from making sure that we have, as a government, access to 5 best practices across that spectrum. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct. And moreover, it was an attempt to make it more efficient for the government to procure those services.
Thanks very much, Mr. Jenius, and then we have Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Thank you, Chair. One observation, it was said earlier that the procurement ombudsman did not find fraud. I would just say he also did not find pickles because that wasn't what he's looking for. His mandate isn't to lay criminal charges. I do expect criminal charges will be laid in relation to government procurement. We've already had one contractor's house raided, but time will tell. I did want to ask about the issue of money being paid back in relation to the Arrive scam scandal. Parliament passed a motion asking for money to be paid back. Christian Firth testified that no one had even asked him about returning money. Ms. Reza, have you had conversations with the minister about this? Is the minister seeking information or seeking processes to have that money paid back or not?
Thank you very much for the question. Restitution is something that we look at across various elements of ArriveCAN and other cases like we just described. We have had conversations. I've advised the minister that the issue is with legal, looking at the various approaches that can be dealt with and with the client whose budget it is. So I don't know if you have anything further, Karen.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, though, the House prescribed a timeline. Do you have a timeline? Clearly, it's not the House's timeline because the House's timeline has elapsed. Do you have a timeline on this from legal?
I'm going to ask Catherine, who's closer to
Thank you for the question. For the files being mentioned on overbilling, when there's a bill that clearly shows that there was overbilling by specific suppliers, it's possible for us.
The process. I want to know what is being done to get this money back in accordance with the House order. The time has elapsed on it. What is your timeline for reporting back, asking for the money, advising the House on next steps?
Thank you very much for the question. We'll have to come back with a written response in terms of Department of Justice and CBSA in terms of next steps for restitution for ArriveCAN.
Okay. There's not much more to be said except that I don't think that's acceptable. We'll wait for your written response. But the House passes a motion, prescribes a timeline, asking for the money to be asked for back. And we're well past that timeline. And we're hearing that essentially it's in the process of being studied. That's clearly not good enough. But we'll look for a response. Fundamentally, this is on the government for setting those expectations. Now, I was a bit. You were a bit ambiguous in your response on the particular aspect of favoritism in the McKinsey report from the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman found that favoritism was shown towards McKinsey. You seem to say that you agreed with the findings of the report, and yet also that you seem to not to be clear on whether you agreed with the finding of favoritism. Did the government show favoritism towards McKinsey?
Thank you very much for the question. So in terms of PSPC's position on findings and recommendations, we agreed with the Procurement Ombudsman's report. His conclusions, which is he himself has come here and spoken about the fact that he is making negative inferences, PSPC is a little bit more nuanced. We have found no examples of favoritism. These cases PSPC is not involved in. These, in 110, the 4 factors in terms of favoritism are based on many contracts of small value. And as a contract authority, as a common service provider, we haven't issued that many to be able to make the assessment that this is an accurate bias.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the evidence, he provides a report in which he demonstrates, I think, clearly the reasons why he came to the conclusion that favoritism was involved. Based on your reading of the report, do you agree that the government showed favoritism for McKinsey? Is there a recognition of that finding, or are you skeptical about that finding?
In terms of, thank you very much for the question. In terms of the conclusion, PSPC has also noted in a document that it doesn't have the same assumptions as the Procurement Ombudsman. I don't know if you'd like to add
Can we just get a yay or nay, though? Like, do you accept the conclusion that favoritism was shown for McKinsey, or do you not? I mean, either position, would be a fair answer. But I just like to know, really, from the deputy minister, it's do you accept the findings, or do you not accept the findings?
I do not accept the findings, although PSPC is not impacted in it, so it's a little bit difficult.
I'm sorry. Did you say you do not, or you do?
I do not accept that there is favoritism for McKinsey in the current system, based on our assessment as a common service provider.
Okay, so you're not accepting the conclusions of the report in this sense.
If you allow me to jump in.
No. I've got one more question to.
You have about 10 seconds, so make it very brief. A very brief answer.
Okay. Should McKinsey, because of their broader conduct, be on a blacklist? Why were they being contracted at all, in light of all the things we know about their behavior, conflicts of interest around the world, human rights abuses, etc.?
I'm afraid you should have left it at a yes or no. I don't think we're going to have time for a fulsome. Perhaps you can get back to us in writing, though. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for being here with us today and providing us with some insights and shedding some light on the world of government procurement. We certainly have learned a lot over the last number of weeks. And again, knowing just the scale of procurement that takes place by the federal government, I think it's 300,000 contracts annually, is just a massive amount of work. I wanted to ask Ms. Reza, my colleague had used the word collusion, and I know that you had taken exception to that word, and you were just about to, I think, speak to it a little bit. And why you took exception to that word. And I think you ran out of time, if I'm not mistaken. So I just wanted to give you the floor and just to speak about, again, favoritism and also collusion in procurement.
Thank you very much for allowing me to follow up, because we did want to come back and talk about what we're doing for measures of collusion to ensure that the procurement system has an integrity. But I think it's worthwhile to circle back to the issue that we just went with in terms of the findings and recommendations as it relates to favoritism. At PSPC, we look at the Procurement Ombudsman report and we look across it to see how we can best apply it, how we can best put in best practices, and how we can adjust. So in terms of this particular element, it's difficult for us because we do hundreds of thousands of contracts, and we need to be able to assess the broader bidder pool. So, for example, how many times did McKinsey compete, to be able to assess was there favoritism? Is this structured on these very, modest contracts? And we have to look at the contract value to see whether or not, when they were sole sourced, it exceeded what they competed for. There's a lot of different assumptions that we need to unpack and work with the procurement ombudsman. So I'm a little bit the favoritism, while PSPC as a common service provider was not implicated in the findings, there's one small contract, I do want to be able to give a thoughtful response and make sure that, we're not offside, because there are so many recommendations and best practices here. Je vais me tourner.
Yeah, thank you. And also, when you look at, for instance, from my standpoint, is that you need to look, is there positive, concrete evidence that would demonstrate that PSPC did favor McKinsey over another supplier? And, I know that the ombuds draw some negative inference for the lack of information, but I think when we drill down at PSPC contract, we cannot accept the fact that there is evidence that would show that, there was a preferential treatment that was afforded to McKinsey. There's no such evidence on file.
One of the things we heard is that today is that PSPC, for example, or the procurement officers work together. There's an iterative process, a back and forth process at times between the procurement officers and the vendors. Can you just explain why that is appropriate to have that sort of exchange back and forth between the procurement officers and the vendors?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the procurement ombudsman also spoke about this in terms of having industry participation, because we have to make sure we're shaping a solicitation that is not too restrictive, that is encouraging open competition. So we need to have the dialogue with the supplier base to see, is this doable? Are the timelines going to be met? So there is a certain level of back and forth as the strategy is being shaped. And once we move into a solicitation phase, it becomes a much more, gated, transparent element of the process where that continuum has changed and it's a more formal response. But Molly?
Thank you for the question. And I think what I would add here is that when looking at the types of contracting that was done in the instance of McKinsey, you have the full range in the sense that we've used supply arrangements, standing offer, as well as competitive processes and sole source. So in each of those instances, there would be a different type of engagement with the industry members that would have been competing. So for instance, for the large value contracts, we would have had a open process that we would have had a fairness monitor. We would have had others that would be involved to make sure that open, fair, transparent. In certain other circumstances, such as a low dollar value contract, it's completely appropriate for us to deal directly with the supplier to negotiate the best possible price and to work through that together. It's a negotiation process. So it really is on a spectrum, and there are very clear guidelines and frameworks that are used for that type of industry engagement. And as the Deputy Minister has indicated, it's encouraged that we engage with our supplier community, and it's something that we take very seriously to ensure it's done professionally. And that's something we also work with our client departments on, who are the technical authorities. They're the ones responsible for defining the actual requirements of an individual contract. So it's very important that they also be involved in this and respect the integrity of the process. So that's something that our procurement officers work very hard to do as well.
Thank you very much. And we are done with our witnesses. Ms. Reza, Ms. Royds, Mr. Laporte, and Ms. Pullen, thank you for joining us again. You're welcome to stay and listen to the riveting discussion on our budget if you wish, but otherwise you are dismissed. Colleagues, we're just going to go in.
Mr. Chair, I've got something I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, let me please get to my stuff, sir. Colleagues, we're just going to do the budgets. It has been distributed to everyone. Again, these are the upper limits. There's 24,750 for Canada Post, rural and remote communities. All in agreement? Wonderful. And same amount for study on our red tape reduction modernization study. All in agreement? Thank you very much. Two items, and yes, I'll get you, Mr. Perkins. Two items quickly. Mr. Firth in our committee of the whole, when he was called in the bar, was asked several questions that he promised to respond back to us. He has responded. It is just getting translated right now, so will be sent out to members, but it is the members' responsibility to check to make sure the questions or the answers are satisfactory, or if they were answered. So, sake of argument, if Mr. Lewis asked for something and it's no response, it's up to Mr. Lewis to advise the committee of that. So probably end of week or early next week. So when you have it, keep an eye on it. Again, it's your responsibility. Canada Post and the main estimates, we're running into some headwinds from the ministers. We were going to have the president of Canada Post here May 29th. Lo and behold, TBS, Minister Anand and Minister Duclos both insisting they're only available on that date as well. So we'd be looking at 16 witnesses, and with our new setup, they would be out in the hallway. So we're trying to arrange different times, perhaps a 4-hour meeting on the Wednesday so we can accommodate everyone and we don't have 16 people in here for an hour. I will let everyone know, hopefully end of this week or early next week, if we have another solution. We might have to find another time for the president of Canada Post. If everyone will allow me flexibility with the president, we will do so, but it's certainly not our intention to have 16 witnesses in here for 2 hours on the mains in Canada Post rural. Was there something, Mr. Bachrach?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chair, thanks for all the legwork you're doing on this. It's frustrating. I wonder for the estimates if we could name specific individuals that we want as witnesses. It seems like a funny process where we say we want the minister and then 20 people show up. Like it almost seems like an intentional kind of strategy to I'm not sure what the strategy is, but
Yeah.
it seems like a way to kind of muddy the waters and dilute what is really about accountability.
That's always been my reaction over the years, but it's generally their support. So to be, sake of argument, Minister Anand and her DM and an ADM and maybe the CFO. So it's typical. It's just because it's 3 departments at once, and that's how we ended up.
The idea here, though, is to spread it out because we have seen that before.
I'm hoping, yes, that we can find agreement to do it over 4 hour if they are only available on the 29th.
And then, if I may, we want the Canada Post CEO separately on our study, ideally.
That has been the declared will of the committee, that the President of Canada Post appears separately on the rural post office study.
And then I have one more matter related to Canada Post, but I don't know if you want to wrap this up first.
I prefer we could wrap it up because I see Mr. Perkins getting impatient, and we turn into.
Can I just throw out this one piece? It's very short, and I've spoken with you about it. But in the document order that was just returned from Canada Post regarding the closure of post offices since the 1994 moratorium, there is very scant information. We were very specific about what information we were requesting, and all that is provided is a number per year, two-column list, and a number of post offices closed per year. We wanted specifically the communities in which they were closed and the reason for closure. So I would love to empower you, Mr. Chair, to go back to them and clarify the original request and demand the documents.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I noticed that myself because that was something I think I added in, the reason for the closure. So if everyone's fine, we'll just write a letter to them asking, provide for the information.
Sure.
That's fine. Mr. Perkins, go ahead, keeping in mind we turn into pumpkins in about 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm bringing up my favorite subjects, Stellantis and Volkswagen contracts. We've had a number of motions since December. I think MP Massey had one on here to try that attempted to find a solution back then to narrow the scope rather than just the whole contracts. And there have been lots of discussion by Liberal members that somehow if we release the whole contracts, there would be some sort of commercial sensitivity in that. So in the spirit of compromise, I've circulated to the clerk proposed motion that tries to accommodate the concerns of that were expressed by several other parties. While I believe that there is very little that's commercially sensitive in the contracts because the ministers, the Liberal ministers and the Prime Minister and this committee have spoken at length about the number of jobs associated with each contract in both the construction and production phases, then it should be absolutely of no commercial sensitivity for the government to release the clauses in the contracts related specifically to the job commitments in those contracts and make them public, since the 2,500, 2,700, 1,300, all those numbers that have been talked about in the House, in public, in the media, are not obviously commercially sensitive, so the clauses around those should be released. So the motion I won't read here because we're short on time, and the first part basically lists the companies that we're talking about, and in the second part says basically that we want the contract clauses that detail the job commitments, including any and all prohibitions or limits on the use of foreign replacement workers, any requirements that require Canadian citizens or permanent residents to be employed, any and all references to direct and indirect and induced job commitments, and any penalties outlined for failing contractual obligation. There's a few other things it asks for, once the committee has those, for ministers and officials from both the companies and the departments to appear to answer questions related to those job commitments. And since this is basically what the NDP has been asking for, and the Liberals have been saying, well, we can't release the whole contracts because they're commercially sensitive, this part isn't. And so I would find it hard to believe that anyone in this committee would vote against this motion. If you do, then there's obviously something else to hide that says that these commitments don't do what the government has said they do publicly. So I'll leave it at there since we're short on time, Mr. Chair, and consider this tabled, and hopefully we can vote on it today.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if we can suspend so we can actually read. It's the first time I'm laying eyes on this motion, so I'd like us to suspend and give us 10 minutes to read through it, please.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're not going to have resources for that. If we suspend, my hope, I'm not sure if there's, I see Mr. Backrack, but I'm not, we're not going to be able to do that because of lack of time. Is there a desire to vote on this right now, considering very similar outcome of what's today? Wednesday,
do this on Monday?
to Mondays? Well, that's what I'm saying. Is there a desire then to vote on? My worry is, yeah, we can go. We'll have to suspend in a few minutes, and I'd rather we kind of vote on it to put it to bed so that we don't interrupt our red tape Monday.
No, I would need time to actually read and study. I want to give Mr. Perkins's motion the due respect.
Why don't we, can't suspend, but why don't we skip over to Mr. Backrack, and then we can come back to you on the speaking list first. Mr. Backrack?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And this is right at the end of the meeting. I don't think we can really do this justice in the time remaining. But I would note, and I know Mr. Massey came to OGO at the last meeting and made this point on behalf of our party, but there are negotiations ongoing between the labor unions and the companies, and there is a real reluctance and opposition on the part of those unions to have this turned into a three-ring political circus because they feel like it's going to jeopardize those negotiations. And I'll just read specifically from a piece in iPolitics that I believe appeared yesterday. And this is a quote, I believe, from the Canadian Building Trades. And it says, while we are pleased that all parties are concerned with Canadian unionized jobs, we do not believe it is in the interest of our ongoing discussions in pursuit of memorandums of understanding with global automakers for such an expansive production order to be proceeded with at the current time while sensitive negotiations are being undertaken. Our preference would be to revisit this issue in 1 month to allow all parties to conclude negotiations. So, you know, I think this is an interesting line of inquiry. I think it is of interest to Canadians to know how these contracts deal with Canadian jobs. But right now, there are negotiations that are sensitive and that are ongoing, and I think it would behoove this committee to respect those negotiations by not proceeding with a document production order at this time.
Check, as I promised.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate what my colleague Mr. Backrack has stated. I mean, the CBTU, which is their concerns are at the center of this discussion and this debate. We're absolutely unequivocally clear that they see opening up the contracts at this point, especially at this sensitive point, as potentially undermining the conversations that they're having with Honda and with other companies. But more than that, again, we're in a situation where Mr. Perkins is asking us to listen and to follow him and completely ignore the voice, again, not just of CBTU, not just the voice of the Canadian Building Trades Union, but the voice of Unifor, again, the largest union in Canada. And the voice of, in my community, the president at the time, the president of Unifor Local 444, which represents, again, thousands of auto workers who work for Stellantis. These are folks that are, again, at the center of this discussion because this potentially has impacts on their livelihoods and their future. And future jobs. They said they don't want to see this happen because they see it as a risk. They see it as a danger. They see it as undermining the very investments that their membership relies on and will rely on for jobs. Completely ignoring, not just on the labor side, but completely ignoring the business side as well too. the Canadian Chamber of Commerce was absolutely clear in saying that this would undermine Canada's competitive advantage in being able to attract future investment to this country. And future investment. And we've seen over the last 4 years, we've seen $50 billion of investment delivered to Canada by this federal Liberal government.
Mr. Mayorchuk, I apologize. I have to interrupt because I do have to suspend the meeting because we are literally out of resources. You will get the time you need, and we have to take this back up Monday. Thank you, everyone.